This episode is brought to you by the House of Chanel.
Join us for Chanel Connects, the Venice Biennale edition. We've taken up residence in Italy to introduce you to the artists, curators, thinkers, and makers behind the world's most important exhibition of contemporary art. Guests include actress Vicky Krieps.
I've been trying to push myself to a place where I let go.
Artist Julien Creuset.
My studio looked like a secret kitchen.
And renowned gallerist Sadie Coles.
The main thing is to keep your ears open.
Listen to Chanel Connects on Chanel.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
It's a hopeful movie, actually, because it's a lot of sinister events that end up becoming hopeful in the end. And then I also wanted people to come out and just want to explore more of Lorca's work.
I'm Ben Davis, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News where the art world meets the real world, bringing each week's biggest story down to earth. Marcel Dzama has an immediately recognizable style as a visual artist, but his energy has far exceeded visual art. Born in Winnipeg, Canada in 1974, Dzama got his start with the Royal Art Lodge, a group that came together as students at the University of Manitoba in the mid-90s. Their collaborative working method, where one artist would start a work and others finish it, were called the Exquisite Corpse, a parlor game associated with the Surrealists. As Dzama developed his own independent practice, moving to New York in 2004, he continued to explore the surreal in watercolor and ink. His work is replete with dancers and masked figures, whimsical animals, groovy monsters, human-plant hybrids, and grinning moons, all in an intricate but deliberately naive style. Dzama has permuted these offbeat interests into a variety of other media as well, from zines to dioramas to films. He's done album art for They Might Be Giants and Beck, made films starring Kim Gordon and Amy Sedaris, and created costumes for both a Bob Dylan music video and the New York City Ballet. Now, he's expanding his list of collaborations even further. New York's performance art biennial, Performa, is returning, with a roster of artists commissioned to do new work in experimental performance of various types. Marcel Dzama's piece, titled To Live on the Moon for Lorca, is among the highlights promised by the 2023 program. In it, he fuses multiple threads of his practice: costume, dance, drawing, and film, and he also returns to his surrealist inspirations. Specifically, this work is Dzama's tribute to the life and work of Spanish Surrealist poet Federico Garcia Lorca. It incorporates both Lorca's tragic life story and an obscure, unproduced, surrealist screenplay called A Trip to the Moon, which Lorca wrote while he was living in New York in 1929. It's fascinating material to dig into on many levels, and in the lead-up to the opening of the show at the Abrams Art Center, Dzama came into the Art Angle office to talk about his work and interests, about Federico Garcia Lorca, and about what surrealism does and doesn't mean today.
Marcel Dzama, thank you for coming into the studio today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I actually just came here via the Bedford station on the L, and, you happen to have a mural there. You're part of my commute.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was quite an honor to have that put up in that stop, especially because it was actually the first place I stayed in New York when I moved here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me think, you're part of my commute. You've had this tremendously successful career. I think your style is pretty immediately recognizable graphically, but you've worked across a ton of different media. So I guess for people listening, how would you describe what you do? Like, what's the common thread that holds it all together?
Whenever I meet relatives that don't know what I've done, I just say that I do figurative surreal work, and then that way kind of covers it all.
Sure. Well, I mean, how do they, and they're like kind of nod
and they're like,
smile.
Yeah.
I mean, but I guess the reason I asked is because you work across so many media. Like, what's the thing that translates across so many things?
During art school, I always went from film to drawing to painting to sculptures, and so I always enjoyed switching it up. Drawing was always the first thing, though. Like, that's what I started.
That's the
doing.
foundation.
Yeah, the foundation for it all. Sometimes I just need to get out of my comfort zone and Yeah, I just like to switch it up sometimes and just keep it fresh.
Are there particular artists that in art school you particularly look to?
Yeah, I was really big into William Blake and the Dadaists, Marcel Duchamp.
The other Marcel.
Yeah, the other
call
Marcel. I actually got into him because of the name.
Really?
I saw it as a little kid and pulled out his book. I never knew anyone named Marcel, and so I pulled it out and kind of was just fascinated by it.
We're talking today about this performance you're working on, and I was looking back over your career and thinking about what a big theme collaboration is for you. And you got your start in Winnipeg in the 90s in a collective, the Royal Art Lodge, which did a lot of collaborative work, and you've collaborated with a ton of people like Spike Jonze and Maurice Sendak and Raymond Pettibon, Kim Gordon, Amy Sedaris, a really eclectic cast of characters in your life. So let's just start there. Like, how do you think about collaboration?
I really enjoy it. It's kind of, you can be more anonymous in it, especially when I was in the Art Lodge. So there was like 7 of us, so
yeah, maybe just
experiment.
say. Actually, I brought it up, but maybe just say a little bit about the Royal Art Lodge for people who don't know.
It was just a group that we started in art school. It was my little sister, my uncle, and then 4 other art students. And my uncle was actually a year younger than me. So my mom had me when she was like 18 or something. And so my grandma, I think, was like maybe 40 when she had my uncle. So we were more like brothers or cousins. And we always collaborated on music, and we used to do comic books and things like that.
What was the methodology of collaboration there?
We would try to just start a drawing and then pass it on. And then by the end of the day, they would all be finished. And then we go through them, and we had this kind of like a suitcase selection of which drawings were good, which were mediocre, and which were to be destroyed. And we voted on it. Sometimes there was a few. Usually they went into the mediocre ones if they were...
If it was a split vote.
Yeah. Or if someone really insisted that it shouldn't be destroyed.
So it was like acting like a band, kind of.
Yeah, definitely like a band.
Because I just say that because you were also a music guy. You were in a ton of different
we were
bands
all in bands
back
together in each other's bands.
I understand bands of all kinds.
Oh, yeah.
You were talking about working across media is kind of shaking you out of yourself, and it's sort of the same with collaboration, huh? It's like a way to open up new energy, get new ideas into the mix. Yeah,
because you could really experiment. Your ego disappears, basically, when you're collaborating in some ways, because you have to let in everyone else's as well. So it kind of is this blend, unless you're more of the competitive type, which I never really was.
So we're talking about To Live on the Moon for Lorca, your commission for Performa, the performance art biennial. So what was their ask of you? How does a Performa commission come together?
They just approached me last year. I've been to a few of the performances, so I was honored to be part of it. I've been asked by the Lorca Foundation maybe 10 years ago if I'd be interested in working on this short screenplay that Lorca had written called Trip to the Moon. And I'd always had it in the back of my mind to do it, but I was just always too busy. And so I thought this was the perfect mix to...
Did they just come to you with the screenplay saying, we think you'd be interested in this?
Yeah, I must have quoted some Lorca work or something in one of my drawings. I love Lorca's poems, and so I think I must have had something in there. Because I had a few shows in Spain, and the great niece of Lorca, she had seen those shows. And then I met her in Mexico City at an art fair, and she really liked one of the pieces that I did, and she approached me with this Lorca project.
So you had the text, the idea to do something with this Lorca text that may or may not have been a performance, and then the performer asked you if you had a performance in you, and then that's the origin of this project?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I mentioned that I had this screenplay to do, and I thought it would be a perfect opportunity to bring it to life. And I also wanted to do a performance element to the film, so I thought that would be a good way to have like a live soundtrack. And then some of the performers that are in the film can also come to life and see them do some of their dancing and their acting.
Yeah, it's really ambitious sounding. It's described as your first evening-length performance, and it's got a performance component, a music component, and a film component. Like, maybe just walk people through what you're expecting to happen.
Oh, yeah. So when you enter the space, hopefully it has some sort of atmosphere. We're trying to make it look kind of like the same world that the film is going to be as well. So there's elements from some of the props from the film are in there, and then we're covering...
The film you've staged.
Yeah, the film was staged. And then the seats will also be covered with like polka dots, because some of the main characters wear these hooded polka dot outfits. And what else is there? There's a giant moon that moves and talks. Or am I giving away things? Or
Well,
maybe I guess it's fine.
I mean, you're
It's fine.
spoiling
I'm
your
spoiling
own
my own thing.
play. But
and then in the end, so there's an interactive element to it all.
what are the big challenges of putting together something like this? I mean, it's different than the way you normally work, although you've done films before.
Yeah, this one was a little easier because I actually had a production person with me because of having Performa work with me. Before, when I've done films, it's me trying to... Basically, rounding up everyone is the hardest part, especially in New York. Everyone's so busy. And so it was a lot easier than some of the other projects I had done that were film. The main thing that was hard, I found out when I was originally approached by the Lorca Foundation, they said that the film had never been made. But I found a Catalonian artist had made the film.
Oh, really?
So 3 days before I was about to shoot. So I changed the whole film and rewrote it and made it my film instead of the screenplay.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So someone had taken the same text and done their version.
Done their version, yeah.
So you wanted to make something that
So
was like
I
a little
was
bit more your own? You're like,
Yeah, because I thought if I was the first person to do it, I don't mind doing someone else's film. But I thought if I'm not, I might as well do something that I have a little more control over it than...
I guess that's what you call a negative inspiration.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about inspiration.
And it kind of came as a fever dream, too, because I was really kind of like upset about it and went to sleep and then kind of woke up with all these ideas and in the middle of the night and just wrote them all down and then tried to tie it into, because it still connects with A Trip to the Moon. Like if you read that screenplay, it's almost like a sequel or a rewrite or something.
Yours is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if there were any positive inspirations. Are there other performance artworks you're looking to, or besides the Lorca text?
The Lorca text. I mean, just working with the choreographer, Vanessa Walters, like she came up with some really great dances just based on like our temp music. And so I'm always amazed what she can come up with. And we had special effects. There's a head that blows up. But working with the special effects people with the head blowing up, it was quite fun. We made like a plaster cast of this giant mask I had made out of plaster. Well, it was paper mache, but plaster first. And then we dropped a watermelon painted like a moon onto this giant head. And it was filled with spaghetti and chocolate sauce inside of condoms. And when it hit the plastic cast head, it blew up so perfectly. And we only had one take, and we only had one head and everything. So it was kind of...
Only had one head. Well, it sounds very, carnivalesque. I mean, your work, you've worked in costumes before, and there is a kind of a carnival, surrealist, macabre carnival vibe to what you do.
Yeah, there was a lot of costumes involved in this. I had a really great collaborator for that, too. She goes under Christian Joy. She makes like costumes for Karen O of the Yeah Yeahs and a bunch of other bands, too.
Cool.
Yeah.
A question I have about doing this kind of work for Performa is they tend to get artists who work in a lot of other media to do performance art. And it's a specific discipline performance, a specific medium of its own. It's a little different than theater, too, or other kinds of performance. So I just wondered, do you have a theory of performance art? Or how do you think about the idea of a performance artwork?
Yeah, it was actually really nice to actually do a performance because I was working on a lot of large-scale drawings, and I was kind of wanting to do something that would be more of the moment. You had to be there to see it type of thing. So almost like being a musician back in the day. And
like live drawings or?
Oh, no. I was just doing drawings for shows. And so the performance element of just having it be more of the moment of actually coming to the event and seeing it was really interesting to me. So
Right. So part of the show, the decor of the show, like it was a show element.
I like that whole idea, and that it's, you had to be there kind of idea. But I guess there is a film element to it, so I guess it will live on after in some way. It
has a product that enters the record, There's a part when you're there, and then there's the part that lives on.
Yeah.
I guess you still had to be there to see that exploding head. I've held back about getting into the Lorca because I feel like there's so much to say about it, and I think it's a really interesting material.
Yeah. After changing the film from Trip to the Moon to my version, To Live on the Moon, I actually added a lot of Lorca's biography into it. So there's his assassination or his murder by the Spanish nationalists. And then at the end, he gets like resurrected, I guess, or reincarnated as the moon. His film was actually pretty tragic. It was almost more of a revenge film. See, he made it after reading the script that...
Well, he never actually made... He didn't finish it.
No, he just wrote the screenplay.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should describe what this is, because A Trip to the Moon is this really unique document. It's like a surrealist screenplay is, I guess, how I'd call it.
Yeah, he wrote it after reading Buñuel and Salvador Dali's film. Is it Chien Andalou?
Chien Andalou, yeah. And
there's a character in there that he thought they were kind of making fun of him in it. So he made his revenge film, which I kind of like that whole idea. There's a scene where this couple that draw a mustache on this dead body, and it's a Salvador Dali mustache. And then they start making out over top of him. And I kind of think it's has that sort of revenge element.
For people who haven't read this text, it's relatively short. It's 70-some bullet pointed sort of surrealist vignettes in description. So I'll give people a sense. Like it says, like, number 1, the first scene. White bed against a gray wall. A dance of the numbers 13 and 22 appears on the bedclothes. From 2 they begin to multiply until they cover the bed like minute ants. 2. An invisible hand pulls off the bedclothes. 3. Big feet run quickly wearing extravagant black and white lozenge patterned socks. And so on like that. I mean, it's like they're totally kind of odd little atoms of thought.
Yeah. With mine, I kind of almost took away the more randomness of it and tried to turn it into a story. So those numbers are in the film, and then there's the ants that appear in there as well. And I don't think the bed appears, but...
What do you do with the numbers? What do the numbers mean?
Yeah, I don't know what the numbers mean. In my version, there's like a Last Supper type scenario, and this pope or priest slaps it on the head of this kid. There's a swimsuit on, which is another scene in the film, which is kind of a terrible scene in there. It's like basically like a priest and a young boy listing scene. So
it's an edgy text. I mean, it's a hard text. Yeah. It's like surrealist in the strong sense.
There's a lot of animals being strangled in there too.
Yeah.
So it's of its time.
Yeah, I mean, if people know Chien Andalou with the famous, razor blade across the eye, it's
and the dead donkey.
Channeling that. It's channeling that energy.
That was one good thing about changing the script, actually, because I could kind of work around the situations. So the scene with the priest and the swimsuit kid actually almost happens, but that's where it becomes a revenge fantasy instead, where the priest's head explodes.
Right. You already kind of touched on this, but you said that you have a long-time connection to Garcia Lorca, who's this really important Spanish surrealist, part of the classic generation with Buñuel and Dali. What was your exposure to him? What's your connection to him?
I was big into Leonard Cohen, just probably coming from Canada. And I always heard him reference Lorca, and so I got into Lorca.
Sure, yeah. Take This Waltz, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And
one of my all-time favorite songs, to be honest.
And so basically I just read his poetry. I didn't really get into his theater pieces so much, or his plays. Later on I got into them, and they were really beautiful. There's some really nicely adapted films of them too. They're all in Spanish, which is nice.
I mean, he seems to have a significance as an artist, but then also his personal story is part of this. Like, you've taken this surrealist screenplay, given it life, but then it's not an adaptation of A Trip to the Moon. It's To Live on the Moon for Lorca. And like you said before, you do kind of tell his story, which is tragic. He was executed by fascists in Spain 7 years after he wrote that piece.
Yeah, and it was actually lost till 1989 or something like that. And it was found in a drawer of this filmmaker in Mexico. After this filmmaker had passed away, his widow found his desk drawer. And then I think it was included in the complete works of his in like 94 or something like that. And so
I have two other thoughts about him and you. Okay, let me throw them at you. One is there's some shared symbols, right? I mean, like you have this long-standing vocabulary of symbols, including moon and animals and kind of harlequin figures, all of which feature in this. So did that feel like eerie when you read it, or?
Yeah, I don't know which one came first because I was reading Lorca's work before I got obsessed with the moon, and then also I guess I always had harlequins in there. But I almost feel like it was a slight influence from Lorca, the whole moon obsession.
Came to you, into your work.
Yeah.
Do you think it means the same thing?
No, because I really got it more into it when I was traveling in Morocco and was up in the mountains over there, and it just felt like I was so close to it. And then later when the pandemic happened, my whole family and we moved to the country, and just kind of, my son really got into astrology, and I guess it's Lorca and my son that got me into the moon.
Because I feel like the moon might suggest death, right? A trip to the moon is like trip to the great beyond. Yeah. You're almost trying to resurrect him, right?
Yeah. Well, he becomes the moon in the end. He's the man on the moon, I guess, or the moon in general. So
yeah, I feel like you're almost trying to give us a happy.
Yeah, I was basically trying to give a happy ending to everyone's sad situation in his film and himself. Mine's the Hollywood version.
well, I mean, I guess
this is like the French.
I wanted to ask you about surrealism because he's drawing on Dali and Buñuel, and that work, Un Chien Andalou, really is an assault on the viewer. I mean, literally, they cut open an eye in front of you. And this is kind of classic surrealist energy around, surfacing your unspoken desires and repressed taboos and so on, kind of trying to shock the viewer. And like the very first thing you said, you draw on figurative surrealism. But I mean, you think that's possible to shock people with images like that? Or
no, I think I learned that from art school. Coming out of art school, that's all anyone was trying to do was shock everyone else. And it was almost like the most boring thing you could do. I don't know if you can shock anyone anymore and think of it as an artwork. But I appreciate the surrealists and just their more randomness. And I know that, especially like the Dadaists, there was more of a reaction from like World War I and just the terrible things that were happening out of actual conscious thought.
What rationality had done? It had led to this tremendous carnage, and so people thought, let's try irrationality for a little while.
Let's get rid of this.
But then our world now feels so irrational and random that I feel it's hard to kind of access those things in a kind of liberation sense.
Well, in some sense, there's a rational thought to it for me, this film and performance, but I think to someone else, you'd really, there's so many inside jokes, just references to also Lorca's work that you would need like a novel to probably piece it all together.
Should I tell you the second thing I think about you and Lorca?
Yes.
Well, you're both, you're Canadian, making your life in New York. He was a Spaniard, living Lake of New York and trying to make sense of that experience through symbols and art.
Yeah. And actually, he wrote Trip to the Moon when he lived in New York.
Yeah, exactly.
I think he was living in Harlem at that time. Yeah, so
it's a very Spanish depiction of New York. It's just full of Andalusian vibes. But it's nevertheless, it's about the experience of kind of trying to make sense of something.
There's this strange energy in New York when you come here, and I felt like when I lived in Winnipeg, like I had a lot of time to work on pieces, and I worked at a slower pace. But when you come here, the speed of everything is so much faster, and I feel that you do progress a lot faster here. You do just so much more in one day than you could possibly do in like a week in some other place. Well, at least Winnipeg. not to badmouth that, but
it's like that bullet pointed tempo of the screenplay. Like 1, 2, 3.
It does have that
images hitting you one after another.
Yeah.
So I guess final question. Is there a message of To Live on the Moon for Lorca, or is there something you want people to come away from it with?
It's a hopeful movie, actually, because there's a lot of sinister events that end up becoming hopeful in the end. And then I also wanted people to come out and just want to explore more of Lorca's work and maybe check out the original screenplay as well. And he has so many amazing poems. Get his complete works.
Fantastic. Well, I couldn't agree more with that, and I can't wait to see the show. So thank you so much for talking to me, Marcel. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this week's episode of The Art Angle. If you like what you've heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, please take a moment to rate and review us. It helps other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili and Caroline Goldstein. Thanks for listening. See you next week.